The phone rang at 6:47 inches the morning, and I already knew I wouldn't answer it. I sat there at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, watching my son's name light up the screen over and over, and I just let it ring. 3 times. 4. Then silence. I picked up my mug and took a sip, and looked out the window at the yard I'd mowed every summer for 31 years, and I thought about how strange it is that you can love someone your whole life and still not recognize them at the end. That call was 6 months ago. But if you want to understand what it meant, I have to take you back further than that. All the way back to a Tuesday in October, when my doctor sat across from me with a folder on his desk and a look on his face that told me everything before he even opened his mouth. My name is Gerald. I'm 68 years old. I spent 34 years as a civil engineer, retired at 62, and spent the next 6 years doing what I always said I would, fishing on the weekends, reading the books I never had time for, taking my wife, Carol, on the road trips we'd planned since our kids were small. We had a good life. Not a fancy life, but a solid one. The kind you build with your hands and your patience, and a lot of years of showing up. Carol and I raised 2 children. My son, I'll call him my older one, is 41 now. My daughter is 38. They grew up in the same house, with the same parents, the same dinners, the same summer vacations at the lake up in Michigan. I coached my son's Little League team every spring. I drove my daughter to every single one of her dance recitals, even the one 3 hours away in the middle of a snowstorm. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because later, when things happened, I kept going back to these moments, trying to figure out where I went wrong, trying to find the part where I made the mistake that produced the people my children eventually became. Maybe the mistake was giving too much. Maybe it was never making them work for anything. Or maybe some people just turn out the way they turn out, and no amount of Little League or dance recitals changes what's underneath. Carol got sick first. Breast cancer. Caught late. Stage 3. That was 4 years before my own diagnosis. We fought it together. I drove her to every appointment. I sat in every waiting room. I learned more about oncology in that first year than I ever wanted to know. She fought hard. Carol did. She was the toughest person I've ever known, and I say that having worked construction sites and engineering crews my entire career. She was tougher than all of them. During those years, I noticed things. Small things at first. My older one would call, maybe once a week, then once every 2 weeks, then once a month. He was busy, he said. His job, his kids, his life. I understood. People have lives. My daughter was a little better for a while. She'd come by on Sundays sometimes, but then she moved across town, and Sundays became every other Sunday, then once a month, then holidays only. Carol noticed it too, though she never said much. That was her way. She'd get quiet when something hurt her, and I'd know. We didn't ask for much. We weren't needy people. All we wanted was for them to be present, to be our children in the way children are supposed to be, at least some of the time. But presence, it turned out, was the one thing they couldn't afford to give us. Carol passed on a Wednesday morning in March. It was early, just before dawn, and the room was very quiet. I was holding her hand. That was all just the 2 of us in that room, the way it had been just the 2 of us so many times before. I had called both of my children the night before to tell them it was time. My older one said he would try to get there. My daughter said she was on her way. Neither of them came. My older one texted at 11 that night to say he was sorry. Something had come up with one of his kids. My daughter called at 2 in the morning, after Carol was already gone, crying and saying she hadn't realized it would happen so fast. I sat with Carol for a long time after that, in the quiet, and I talked to her a little, and I thought about what it means to spend 51 years of your life with a person and have only the nurses on the night shift as witnesses at the end. I don't say this for sympathy. I'm past sympathy. I say it because you need to understand the shape of things before I tell you what happened next. The funeral was small. Some of Carol's friends from church came. A few neighbors. My old colleague Raymond drove 4 hours from Indianapolis, which meant more to me than I could say. My children both attended. They stood on either side of me at the graveside, my daughter crying loudly in the way that draws attention to itself, My older one stiff and uncomfortable in a suit that still had the dry cleaning tag on the sleeve. After it was over, they came back to the house, ate the food the neighbors had brought over, made small talk with people they barely knew, and left by 3 in the afternoon. 3 weeks later, they both started calling again, not to check on me, not to ask how I was sleeping, or whether I was eating, or whether the grief had the particular weight it does when you've lost someone after 51 years. They called because they had started to think about the house. Carol and I had bought this house in 1987 for $94,000. I don't need to tell you what it's worth now. We'd also done well over the years, not rich, but careful. Careful people who put money away every month because we'd both grown up without much and we remembered what that felt like. My pension was solid. We had savings. Carol had a small life insurance policy. And then there was the house, which sat on half an acre in a neighborhood that had turned very desirable sometime in the last 15 years without us really noticing. My older one brought it up first. He was diplomatic about it, he always was, when he wanted something. He said he'd been thinking about my situation, about how hard it must be for me rattling around in this big house alone, about how maybe it would make sense to think about downsizing, somewhere smaller, easier to manage. He knew a real estate agent, as it happened, his wife's cousin. Very good, very trustworthy. He could arrange a meeting if I wanted. I said I'd think about it. My daughter called 2 days later. She wasn't quite as diplomatic. She said she'd been talking to her brother, and they both agreed that I should really be considering my options, that this house was too much for one person, and that the money from a sale could set me up very comfortably somewhere nice. She mentioned a senior living community 20 minutes away. She'd looked it up online. It seemed lovely. What she did not mention was that the senior living community cost approximately $4,500 a month, which was less than what I would have left after selling the house and splitting whatever remained 2 ways. She had done the math. I could see that she had done the math. I just wasn't sure she realized I could see it. I said I'd think about it. Now, here is the part I haven't told anyone. The part that is maybe the reason I'm sitting here telling this story at all. That October appointment with my doctor, the one with the folder, and the look on his face was 8 months before Carol passed. He told me I had a heart condition, not a dramatic one, not an imminent one, but a real one. Something that needed managing, something that meant I needed to think carefully about the future and make sure my affairs were in order. I didn't tell Carol. She was in the middle of her own fight, and I wasn't going to add to her weight. I didn't tell my children. I drove home from that appointment, made myself a sandwich, sat at the kitchen table, and spent a long time thinking. Then I called an attorney. His name was Frank Diaz, and he'd handled a few small things for me over the years, a contract dispute, some property paperwork. I'd always found him to be a man who listened carefully and talked plainly, which is all I've ever wanted from a professional. I made an appointment for the following week. I walked in and I told him I needed to think carefully about what happened to everything I'd built over a lifetime, and I needed someone to help me do it right. That was the beginning of a process that took several months and involved a great deal of paperwork and several conversations that I found difficult but necessary. By the time Carol passed, everything was in order. Not in the way my children imagined, not in the simple, liquid way they were calculating when they called to talk about real estate agents and senior living communities. In a different way, a way that reflected what I had actually learned about my family over the previous few years. So when my older one started visiting more regularly twice a week, suddenly, very attentive, bringing groceries I didn't need, I was cordial. When my daughter started suggesting we have dinner together, just the two of us, and spent most of dinner asking gentle questions about my finances and my plans, and whether I'd had a chance to think any more about the house, I was pleasant. I let them talk. I let them plan. I listened to everything they said, and I nodded, and I said I was still thinking things through, still adjusting, still processing my grief, which was true in its own way. I was processing my grief. I just wasn't going to let them help themselves to the proceeds of it. About 4 months after Carol's funeral, my older one came over on a Saturday morning with a manila folder. He set it down on the kitchen table and explained that he'd had his attorney draw up a deed transfer document. Just exploratory, he said. just so we could understand what the process would look like if I decided to transfer the house to him and his wife for the time being. For tax purposes, for estate purposes, it would all be very straightforward. He'd already spoken with his wife's cousin in real estate, who agreed the timing was good. He slid the folder across the table to me. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at him. I thought about the Little League games. I thought about the time he broke his arm falling off the garage roof, and I drove 90 miles an hour to the hospital and sat with him in the emergency room for 6 hours, holding his hand, telling him it was going to be fine. I thought about Carol, and how much she had loved this boy, and what she would say right now if she were sitting at this table. I thought she would probably say less than I was about to say. I pushed the folder back across the table. I told him I wasn't signing anything that morning. I told him I needed him to hear something, and I needed him to really listen. I told him about Frank Diaz. I told him that about 8 months before his mother passed, I had worked with Frank to establish a revocable living trust. I told him that the house, the savings account, the investment account, Carol's life insurance, all of it, had been transferred into that trust. I told him that the trust had a very clear set of instructions about how the assets were to be managed and distributed, and that those instructions did not involve a deed transfer to either of my children. My older one stared at me. He asked what I meant. I told him what I meant. I told him that Carol and I had spent the last years of her life watching our children become people we didn't fully recognize, and that I had made a decision carefully, legally, with proper counsel about what to do with what we'd built. I told him that a meaningful portion of our estate was designated for a scholarship fund at the community college where Carol used to volunteer. I told him that another portion was designated for the church, where she had spent 30 years of Sunday mornings. I told him that the remainder was being held in trust for his children, his kids, and my daughter's kids, the grandchildren, to be distributed when they turned 25. He would receive nothing directly. Neither would his sister. He sat very still for a while. Then he said, "I wasn't being fair." He said he was my son. He said Carol would have wanted him to be taken care of. I let him say all of it. When he was finished, I told him that Carol, in fact, had known about the trust. I had told her in the last weeks of her life, when it was clear she was running out of time, and I wanted her to know the plan. She had cried a little. Not because she was sad about the decision, because she was sad it had become necessary. Then she had squeezed my hand and told me I was doing the right thing. He left without the folder. My daughter called that evening. She was not gentle this time. She said I had clearly not been in my right mind since Carol's death, that grief does things to people, that she was concerned about my mental state, that she thought I should speak to someone. She used the word competency twice, which told me she had also spoken to an attorney at some point in the recent past. I told her I was very much in my right mind, had been examined by my physician within the last 60 days, and that if she wanted to pursue a legal challenge, she was welcome to speak with Frank Diaz, whose number I could provide. She hung up. That was the phone call I didn't answer 6 months later. The morning sun on the lawn, the cold coffee, my son's name lighting up the screen. By then, both of them had consulted attorneys, neither of whom told them what they wanted to hear. Because the trust was properly established and properly documented and signed well before Carol's death, when I was in full legal and mental capacity, there was nothing to challenge. Frank had been very thorough about that. I won't tell you it didn't hurt. Of course it hurt. You don't stop loving your children because they disappoint you. That's not how love works, at least not the kind I understand. But there's a difference between loving someone and letting them take from you. There's a difference between keeping a door open and walking through it backward with your hands in your pockets. After a few weeks of silence, my older one sent me a letter, an actual letter, handwritten, which surprised me. It was long. It said he was sorry. It said he had been selfish, that he'd been so caught up in his own life that he'd let years go by without being the son he should have been. It said he didn't expect me to forgive him right away, or maybe ever, but that he wanted me to know he was ashamed of himself. He said he'd told his own kids about it, about what he'd done, about the Saturday morning with the folder, about showing up with paperwork to sign at a dying man's kitchen table, and that his youngest, his 11-year-old daughter, had looked at him and said, Dad, that was really mean. He said that hit him harder than anything I could have said. I read that letter 3 times. Then I put it in the drawer where I keep important things. My daughter has not written a letter. She texts occasionally now, brief, careful texts, like she's testing whether the line is still open. I respond politely. I don't know if she will ever get to the place her brother got to in that letter. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. That's her work to do, not mine. What I've spent the last several months doing is something different, something that has surprised me a little. I started volunteering at the community college, just twice a week at first, helping with their adult continuing education program, mostly retired folks who want to learn computers or accounting, or whatever skill they wished they'd had when they were still working. Then one of the administrators asked if I'd be willing to talk to some of the younger students about engineering, about what the field actually looks like from the inside, about the decisions you make over a career. So I started doing that too. There's a young man in one of my sessions, about 22, works nights at a warehouse and takes classes during the day. He wants to get into civil engineering. He asks good questions, the kind that tell you someone has been thinking hard about a problem before they walked in the room. I've been meeting with him separately, just to talk through things, answer questions. His name is Marcus, and he reminds me a little of myself at that age, not in any specific way, just in the quality of his attention. I told Raymond about him on the phone last week. Raymond laughed and said I'd finally found what I was supposed to be doing in retirement, and it only took me getting my heart rattled and losing my wife and watching my kids turn into strangers to get there. That's Raymond. He's been my friend for 32 years and he still talks to me like that, which is one of the reasons I keep him around. I go to the cemetery every Thursday morning. I bring coffee, one for me, one that I set on the ground next to the stone, which I know is a strange thing to do and I don't much care. I talk to Carol for a while. I tell her about Marcus, about the class, about what's growing in the garden. I tell her about the grandchildren, who still visit, who have no part in any of this and deserve none of its weight. Her granddaughter, my older one's youngest, the 11-year-old who told her father what he did was mean, came over last month and sat at the kitchen table and helped me sort through some of Carol's recipe cards. She held each one very carefully, like they were something fragile. They are, I suppose. I told that girl she could keep any recipes she wanted. She chose 7. Specifically, she chose the 7 that had the most handwriting on them, the most notes in the margins, the most corrections, the most evidence of Carol's presence. She understood something that her father is only now beginning to understand, which is that the things worth keeping are not the things worth the most money. I don't know how the rest of this goes. I'm 68 years old with a heart that needs watching, and a house I'm not ready to leave, and 2 children who have to decide what kind of people they want to be before it's too late to be different people. I can't make that decision for them. I couldn't make it for them when they were small, and I can't make it now. What I can do is what I've always done. Show up. Pay attention. Take care of the things that matter. Carol used to say that love isn't something you feel. You practice it every day. With the small decisions, the ones nobody sees, whether you make the call or skip it, whether you stay or find a reason to leave, whether you show up at the end even when the end is hard. She practiced it her whole life. She practiced it better than anyone I've ever known. I'm still practicing. Some days I'm better at it than others, but I'm still here, still at this kitchen table, still looking out at this lawn, still the same man I was when Carol was next to me. Just quieter now, just alone in the particular way. You're alone after 51 years with one person and then without them. It's a specific kind of alone. If you felt it, you know what I mean. If you haven't, I hope you don't for a very long time. The coffee is cold again. I should probably make a fresh pot. Some mornings I get up early, before the light, and I sit here in the dark kitchen and I don't think about anything much. I just sit. And sometimes, in that quiet, I can almost hear Carol in the next room, moving around the way she always did in the morning, careful not to wake me, even though I'd been awake for an hour already. And I think about all the ordinary mornings we spent like that. Both of us awake and neither of us saying much. Just present. Just there. That's the thing my children never understood, and maybe still don't. Presence is not a grand gesture. It's not a visit on a holiday or a call when something is wrong. It's the Tuesday mornings and the Thursday evenings, and the year your mother is sick and you find a way to show up anyway, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's hard, even when there's something else you'd rather be doing. It's the practice of it. Day after day, I built a scholarship fund in Carol's name. The first recipient will be selected next fall. Frank helped me structure it so that it continues in perpetuity long after I'm gone. Long after my children have had to make whatever peace they're going to make with themselves. Long after the house has been sold, and the kitchen table is somewhere else, and the lawn is someone else's to mow. Carol's name will still be attached to something. Her presence will still be felt by people who never met her. She would have argued with me about this. She would have said the money should go to the kids, that family is family, that you don't cut off your own blood. I know she would have said that because I knew her for 51 years, and I know how she thought. But I also know that in those last weeks, when I told her what I'd done, and she held my hand and cried a little, she didn't ask me to change it. She understood, and Carol's understanding was worth more to me than most people's agreement. I pulled the folder out this morning. My older one's folder, the deed transfer documents, the ones he brought over that Saturday. I'd kept them in the drawer, I'm not sure why. Maybe I wasn't ready to throw them away. Maybe I needed to keep them as evidence of something. A record of a moment I didn't want to forget entirely. I carried them out to the backyard. I have a small fire pit back there that I use in the fall for burning leaves. I set the papers in it and lit them with one match and stood there watching them go. The paper curled and blackened and disappeared. It didn't take long. Then I went back inside and made a fresh pot of coffee and called Raymond. And we talked for an hour about nothing in particular: football, his new knee, a documentary he'd watched about the construction of the Hoover Dam that he thought I'd appreciate. I did appreciate it. We're going to watch it together next weekend when he drives up. That's the thing about getting to this age, about having been through what I've been through in the last few years. You learn, finally, what you're keeping and what you're letting go. You learn which things deserve the fire pit and which things deserve the phone call. You learn that a friend who drives 4 hours to stand at a graveside is worth 100 people who send flowers and stay home. I'm still learning. Every day, a little more. But I know this much. Carol would be proud. Not because I outmaneuvered anyone. Not because the trust held up and the attorneys had nothing to work with. She'd be proud for a simpler reason. She'd be proud because I'm still here, still practicing, still trying to be the person she thought I was on our best days. That's enough. For now, that's enough.